Houston Rockets, and they've parted ways with the aforementioned Kevin McHale. This is a coach that everyone had thought for a while that he was their guy, and they brought in James Harden in a trade that obviously benefited them. They brought in Dwight Howard is supposed to be I don't know if you want to call him the Robin to your Batman. I don't know if you would accept that role, but and then a whole bunch of 3-and-D guys. It was supposed to work out. They even lost Josh Smith, who was on our Bynum gang. Somehow it's not working out this year, and they were supposed to be a contender, and right now they're looking like a pretender, not even being in the playoffs. What are your thoughts on this Houston Rockets team so far?
I mean, James Harden is where the blame should start, in my opinion. Obviously, the organization put a fair bit of the blame on Kevin McHale, and that's why he's no longer employed by them. But when you looked at James Harden's play last season, it wasn't just the offensive numbers that he was putting up. It was the fact that he was actually giving an effort on defense. And this season, he has gone back to kind of his worst habits defensively, which is not making an effort whatsoever. His offensive play has dropped off. I know David Thorpe, I believe, is on a podcast with Zach Lowe, mentioned that James Harden didn't put a lot of his effort into the gym this past summer. He said, well, Steph Curry was working on making himself better on court. James Harden was focusing off court. He's apparently still out of shape. I know there was a stat a couple days ago. I'm sure this has changed a little bit, but the stat was if Steph Curry missed his next 99 consecutive threes, he would still have a better three-point percentage than James Harden, which tells you both how good Curry's been and how bad Harden's been. So you have Harden not playing defense. They're missing Patrick Beverley, or they have been missing Patrick Beverley, and Ty Lawson is in there playing significant minutes, who's somebody that needs the ball in his hands as well as Harden, who isn't going to play defense. And basically when you have two guys that are allowing constant penetration, you have Dwight Howard, who's constantly battling through injuries. Those defensive breakdowns are killing the team, and so much of their offense was reliant on James Harden just kind of playing hero ball. And if he's not going to perform at that MVP type level, and their defense is now suffering, you see the drop off in their record. And so far, the difference is pretty dramatic from last year.
Yeah, no, it was supposed to be, that backcourt that was supposed to take the other. I mean, I think a lot of people saw this coming. They're like, oh, we'll sign Ty Lawson or trade for him there. And they're just like, well, he's going to be a great point guard. He always is up there in the league in terms of assists. And you have one of the league's best scorers. That should just make sense. But then you realize that James Harden needs the ball in his hands all the time, and so does Ty Lawson. And they both don't play defense. And on a team that, anytime you have that revolving door coming through, I mean, unless you're sitting there with, your Rudy Gobert's and your Derek Favors, and even then, I think they'd have a tough time with this. It's a recipe for disaster. Now, Mark, we've been talking the small guys in there. I mean, Dwight Howard can't be happy with this whole thing. I mean, I know we've been following Howard ever since his days with Orlando, and then his issues there with the Lakers. Where do you think the major issue lies here? Do you think it's that guard play? Do you think it's the lack of something else? Do you think it's just injuries? McHale, I mean, this is another situation where you could point the finger in a myriad of ways. Where do you point yours?
Well, I pointed at Return of the Jedi. That scene at the end where Luke goes to his father and pulls off the mask, and it's just like, remember when Harden used to be at OKC and this defensive ace, and he provided all this energy off the bench, and he's just kind of transformed into something I don't understand anymore. Like, he's just, in terms of, like Justin mentioned, the effort he gives defensively and just kind of the energy he emits on the floor. I mean, as the leader of that squad, it just, everything rolls downhill from there. And so watching, footage of Dwight and all the other guys, like Dwight, I saw the game against Boston, and defensively he was barely making an effort to block shots or be a rim protector. I'm like, why has this team just kind of dissolved into chaos and anarchy? It's just like they're not They're not concentrating. It's funny because Clyde Drexler was doing the game. I mean, this is a Hall of Fame player who played for a long time in the league. And he said, what was the words? Basically, they weren't giving an effort as an NBA squad. They're just lethargic, and it's sad to see it. Like you guys said, I mean, these guys went deep in the West last year, and then the telltale sign for me was the fact that Kevin McHale's wife went on Twitter ranting about him being fired. We live in a league where coaches get fired and stars get to play on. That's basically what happens in most organizations. We're seeing it right now, and it's sad McHale has to go. And the truth is that Bickerstaff, the younger Bickerstaff, is walking into a situation where being a defensive coach on the squad last year, now he has to kind of preach as a young guy coaching the squad going forward with Murray on his back. I don't see this being a good situation at all. It just goes back to Harden and him just not growing into the player that he could be.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one there. Justin, I love talking trades. Obviously, we'll be talking about coaching, situations there with Houston. We've heard of the Tom Thibodeaus of the world. We've heard of some other names, some similar ones that we brought up with Sacramento. But, trade-wise, do you think this is the squad we see try to make their way into the playoffs by the end of this season, or do you think there's some change afoot?
I think there are going to be some minor changes. They do need more three-point shooting. I know you love your trades. One that might be interesting, and I've talked to both fans of both teams, and it's a deal that intrigues them, would be Terrence Jones, who's kind of in a bit of a logjam there with Montehunis. Mm-hmm. Moving him to Toronto, who's in need of a power forward, for Terrence Ross. I mean, Ross still has.
I really like that on both sides. I like that idea on both sides.
I mean, Jones has taken a bit of a step back. Ross, you have locked up for a good period of time. You aren't really able to pay both Montehunis and Jones and pursue big free agents, which they do. Houston's made it very publicly known that they want to chase Kevin Durant, which, I mean, if any team has a chance of going after Durant, they'll do whatever they can to get him. But I think that might be something that they do. I don't think there's going to be any major shakeups. I don't think Harden or Dwight are going to be moved this season.
The same with Ty Lawson. You can't see him being moved out, even pumping his value with some stats at the early part of the season.
I mean, he's not exactly putting up numbers. He's playing pretty terribly, and GMs traditionally don't like to trade from a position of weakness. I think that they stick around with the Ty Lawson experiment for a bit longer. Once Patrick Beverley is back, I think they might have a better idea of what their roles are going to be. Lawson has identified that he's willing to come off the bench, so that certainly helps. So I think there's minor moves, but there isn't going to be a dramatic shakeup this season. But heading into the offseason next year, especially with them trying to make the moves to get Kevin Durant, I do expect some dramatic moves. I don't know what form that will take, but I don't think that they are going to stick around with this roster for much longer beyond this year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there, and to me, I think the Lawson thing's kind of two-part. I think whenever you have to play with a guy like Harden, and who's so ball dominant, that it does hurt your statistics in that way. But I also think Houston kind of plays better when their point guard doesn't need the ball. Like, I think having James Harden orchestrate the offense,
James Harden was essentially the point guard last year. I mean,
and for OKC off the bench,
he's good at exactly. I was going to be my next point. He's good at that. When OKC was having trouble down the stretch, and he was there, he was the guy orchestrating that offense. He's good at it.
Yeah, I mean, he was the point guard, and I mean, Patrick Beverley was effectively playing in a bit of a shooting guard position. Like, he spots up from three, and he defends the point guards. But and this is always why I have so much frustration when it comes to people trying to bring up traditional positional roles. I think you need those traditional roles on your team. Like, you need someone to initiate offense. You need someone to play in the post. But, I mean, some teams, they have bigs that are shooting threes, that are passing. Some teams you have, like, for example, Cleveland, like, LeBron James is essentially the point guard there. But, I mean, you just do whoever has that skill and does it the best does that role. It doesn't have to come in that traditional position. And James Harden was effectively the point guard for their team last year, and I think they're at their best when he's doing that. So staggering the minutes of him and Ty Lawson makes a lot of sense to me, because there's so many redundant skills there, and I think it takes away from both players when they play together. I think it's a similar situation in Indiana with George Hill and Monte Ellis. There's two guards that need the ball. So I think teams need to get a little bit smarter with staggering those type of players, so that there's more continuity. When you go to your bench, you have someone else that's initiating that similar role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if there's one guy who got traded this year that I was a little surprised they didn't look at, actually, was Mario Chalmers. I actually thought that Chalmers would have fit in, I don't know, kind of 3-and-D, kind of figured out, like with Lawson
the
there.
defense?
Maybe
Mario Chalmers?
more than Lawson. No, whatever. He's a bit stronger. At least I'll get you kind of something. He gets some steals, which I know isn't defense, but I don't know. Like to me, it just doesn't look like the team makes sense. To me, I would try to get 50 cents on the dollar for Ty Lawson, because look, we know kind of what works there, and we know that ever since we brought in Lawson and maybe some other changes, maybe losing Josh Smith was more impactful than I give it any credit for, but maybe bringing that sense of control back to James Harden wouldn't be the worst. Like, obviously, if Harden ever, knock on wood, goes down, Lawson is going to be a great guy to have, because he can orchestrate that offense. But speaking of orchestrating offenses, Mark, they still need a coach. I mean, we've heard a couple of names go around. This is another crazy group, but a lot of talent. Who do you think would fit this show?
Well, I mean, it's another job I wouldn't want. Brooks has been thrown around. I mean, he played with that organization, and I think he was an assistant with them for a while too. I mean, there's a lot of great guys out there who could coach this organization, but I don't know.
I'll have a Tom Thibodeau. Would you choose him?
Yeah, Thibodeau is a name. The thing is strong personalities, and here's an interesting kind of link. I read this last night that Rick Carlisle and Kevin McHale are very close friends, and I never clued into that. Of course, they played for the '86 Celtics together, and so they were both in very similar situations. Like, we had Harden with McHale. McHale's this really nice guy, really well known around the league, and Harden's very prickly, just generally speaking. And so the situation, it came to blows. They had the player-only meeting, and basically the coach had to go. Very similar situation last year with Rick Carlisle and Rondo. Okay, and so the difference is that Mark Cuban's an outlier owner, general manager. He believes in his coach long term, and they got rid of Rondo. Okay, this is just the environment of the league. Typically, what's going to happen is that the star player is going to have the say. I think Harden's going to have a say in this situation, because basically, essentially, you got McHale fired, and he's going to pick a coach. I don't know if they're going to end up getting one of the top ilk guys, to be honest. So who knows? Maybe they'll grab
the runner-up MVP, right? I think that's a big enough of a draw for a lot of these coaches.
Yeah, but I don't know if they want to go there. That's the situation.
And you have to deal with Superman.
I don't think they're going to get a top 5 coach. Let me just put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And I not that it really means anything, but Houston has never had an interim head coach that hasn't become the head coach. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to stay the same way, but at least an interesting thing to think of. I mean, I guess we'll have to see how Bickerstaff does. But, yeah, I think a Scott Brooks type coach would be best, but a lot of these coaches that we're mentioning, they're kind of fresh off of coaching. And a lot of the time, those guys like to kind of sit around for a little bit. They're still collecting checks from their former teams and kind of wait for a good situation. And, I mean, if I'm a Scott Brooks, I'm looking at Houston, even though I kind of have a rapport with James Harden, and it's in complete disarray. I don't think you want to be your next opportunity to be in a fix-it situation where if it's something that's out of your control, you're still going to get blamed for it.
Well, he gets to stick it to the Thunder at that point, right?
Right, exactly. So I don't. But at the
You
same
can kind
time,
of
like,
feel it now. You can kind of feel, oh yeah, you let me go, I'm going to take one of your rivals, the guy you got rid of, and you still
but at the
regret.
same time, it's a bit of a gong show there, and I don't know if that's a situation that Scott Brooks wants to go into, or if he wants another young team that he can kind of build and that's on its way up. Like, I know they just hired Scott Skiles, but like an Orlando Magic would seem like a good fit for him, and he can kind of replicate what he did
Or
in
the
OKC.
76ers.
Rather, I
once,
mean, no,
once
no,
they
no,
get
no,
rid
no,
of
no, no, no,
Brown.
no, no. I am never going to endorse firing Brett Brown. He is getting that team is overperforming, even though they haven't won a game. That's a roster problem. That's not him.
Yeah, considering all their talents at center. Okay, Justin, we were talking, and I brought up Thibodeau, that obviously tied to Chicago, and I just had this random thought that may be good for both of them. What do you say for a Joakim Noah for a Ty Lawson kind of deal? They get a point guard when Rose is gone to play next to Jimmy Butler, and
No,
then Joakim no, because the free throws doesn't make sense. The backups,
Joakim Noah is averaging fewer than 3 points a game right now. You understand that,
He's
right? Like,
he's ugly right now.
and he's not playing defense that well. His body's kind of broken down.
I'm just taking two guys who are underperforming considering the situations, trying to get them new homes and see if this can revitalize what is.
I mean, Houston got Ty Lawson for a bargain, but that's selling really low, and that's sad because Noah was an MVP candidate not too long ago.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a tough one in Houston. I mean, do you guys think this rights itself enough for the end of the season? Because right now, if you look at the standings, they're not making the playoffs, and this is a team that a lot of us are pretty high on.
I think they end up getting like 7th or 6th seed. I had them 5th going into the year. I think they do kind of right the ship, only because the West, or at least the 7 and 8 seed, is going to be pretty weak teams. Given the injuries to the Pelicans, just kind of given the state of the West and how much better the East is. I think Houston has too much talent to not make it. Kind of similar to the LA Lakers that underperformed a ton with Nash, Pau Gasol, Dwight, and Kobe. They eventually snuck in. I think it's going to be a similar thing with Houston.
Yeah, I think they'll sneak in too, and they tend to step up in big games. Remember how that strange game against the Clippers where they came back with even Harden on the bench, Josh Smith leading. I mean, that was insane. They just kind of pick it up in the strangest moments. So I could see them getting out of the first round with the squad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Houston, we have a problem, and hopefully we have some solutions coming forward. This has been the Houston Rockets talk here on hoopslounge.com audio podcast. Justin Rowan, Marc Griffin, myself, Phil Boileau. Thanks for listening, and join us for all this and more on hoopslounge.com.